Welcome to another Visual Studio tutorial in computing with Dr. D. We'll get on to it now. I've just opened up Visual Studio, and here you can see we'll open a .NET Framework app. We'd better give it a name that's appropriate. We're going to make a contacts app, so that's what we'll call it. We'll just call it version 1. And leave it in our default location. We'll create it. We'll need 2 forms in this app. The first form will allow us to enter in all of our information that we want to store up, and the next form will allow us to read that data from a file. I'll be saving the data to a file in this tutorial. So what I'll do is I'll start laying out the form. I'll put a label up the top and some entry fields, and I won't do it tediously while you watch. I'll lay it out and then you can have a look at what I've done, emulate that later, and we'll start some coding in a minute. So that was quick, wasn't it? There's the form. You can see I've entered in our entry fields: first name, last name, email, mobile number, meeting time. This particular object is a date time picker. Over here, date time picker. So make sure you select that if you want to use it. I've got a multi-line entry, text entry there, text box. So you can see multi-line text box. You can select multi-line there, then you can change it to be multi-line, so you might like to do that. I have used the same font and color on the buttons. I've got a save button to save my data to a file. I have a quit button to close the entire program down. I have a view contacts button which will take me to the next form. And as I said, I'm going to need a new form. So here I go, project, and I'm going to add another Windows form. So add Windows form. So it should come up with form 2 now. So select Windows form, and there's my form 2. And I can lay this out so that I can display the data that I'm going to get out of the file, and I'm going to be able to search for particular contacts that I've made. So we'll save that, and we'll go back to form 1, and I'll start playing with the code a little bit. If we go into save our contact, you'll have to say it. The way I'm arranging this is that every time you click the save button, a new contact and their data will be saved into a file, and I'm going to have to create that file, and we'll have a look at how that runs. When I click on view contacts, as I said, it'll go to form 2, and the quit button will exit the entire program. So we'll start by getting into the save button, the button 1 object, and here I'm going to start accessing some data that I'm going to be getting from the text boxes. So I'll just lay that out for you so you can see how I've done that. To save the information, I'm going to use what's called a CSV file, a comma separated variable file, and I'm going to be saving a string to that file for every entering of our data fields from form 1. You see the 6 fields, I think, there, so all of those have to be saved, and they will have commas separating each of those fields. In order to save that, I'm going to have a kind of global object in here, an internal object, and I'm going to use a string object, and I'm going to build this object as we go through our program. You can see what I'm doing here. It seems to know I want to use get and set. These are keywords that allow us to use our internal object and get data and save the data, to get data from the object and also to save the data to the object. So let's just sit that there. And now I'm going to get some variable information from each of our text boxes. So for example, if I use a variable type called first name from our form, and I take that from text box 1, it should be just the text box 1 data, just the text from it, and I should be able to just save that there into that variable. And so, oh, sorry about that. I should be able to do that for each of my variables and each of my entry fields. So let's get on to doing that now. So you can see I've laid out the variables. I've simply used the var data type here as a kind of generic holder of the information. But all of the information is going to be saved as text. And I'm going to be putting that into our line object. So to get the value, this is just getting the date from that particular date time picker value. Now, as I said, I'm going to put this information into our line object. Now, what I do to do that is I take all of the data and I separate it by a comma in each case. So, for example, I go F name, and then I add that to a comma, and then I add another bit of information, the second name, and again I put a comma in there, and so on. And you'll see I'll just add all of those in. So you can see here now that I've got my text box data added to our string, which is called line, a string object called line. I'm now going to process that data by simply putting it into a file, and we can repeatedly write to the file line by line, and I'll use another function to do that, and I'll call this function file stuff, and I will call that function here. I'll get an error, of course, because I haven't created the file stuff function, but I will do that, and then I'll say I'll make it a private function, or method if you like, and it needs to have the same name and be identified. It needs to have our brackets, and we have no errors there. So what I'm going to do now is use a try and catch device to check that our data is going to be saved into the file, and I'll show you how to do that. So what I've done here is to show you how to use a stream writer. Now, a stream writer is simply an input-output object, an internal object in C#, and I'm using just a variable really named file, and I am getting a file which I've named a text file here. I've just placed it somewhere on my C drive. Your path will be up to you. And true should mean that my data should append to the file when I write more data to the file. Now this is still incomplete, but be careful with your use of brackets. You're using this internal object, you're declaring a new object, you're seeing if the file exists. That's why it's in the try. And if there are errors, you can try and make a catch. So you can say, have a message box, if you like, in your catch statement, and in the message box we might say something like, what did I say over here? Oh, there's a problem with a file. There is a file problem. That's all you really have to say. But you can then output whatever errors are captured as well. So if we actually say catch is going to catch exception EX, and then you can print out whatever that has captured, whatever the exception is. You can type EX and then put it into a string, and it should just print it out for you if you happen to capture anything that needs capturing. So let's just go back and continue with our file, because there are errors here. So we obviously, to do that, we need to get our line, and we need to write that into our file. So let's start doing that. And so we can say there, file write line line. It wants us to say that. And we can do that happily. Although what we want it to do is to check that there's nothing in the line. So we'll say if our line is not equal to null, if our line is not equal to null, then we can write that to our file. And it's trying to be far too helpful here, but let's just organize our brackets a bit better. And then we'll just go and check a few things. So again, you can see here, I've got our, if line is not equal to null, write a line to the file. I'm just adding a little bit of documentation here to help you understand what's going on. File write line. If it does get written to the file, it would be helpful if we had some type of message box that's going to write that, something to confirm that for us. So we could say data written to file for us, and that would be useful. And we can finish off that line. We don't have any errors at the moment. We can see if we create the file, and we could check our file out. So we will need data in each of our fields. We only have our save button that should be functioning. Let's just have a look at it. So here you can have a good look at the file stuff function. I changed the location to local folders. The users directory wasn't really allowing me write to it, so I'm going to create a file in there which we'll use in a moment. I haven't got anything in I haven't even got a file created at the moment, so we'll actually see how it works. We'd simply use file write line line. It's extremely simple, really, isn't it? It just uses that one line of accessing an internal object to write to the file, and then it just simply writes a line of text to the file. If there's a problem, we should have an exception, and simply we'll be writing to a file. I have changed the design meeting date down here. I've just made it a short input format. So, and I've changed it just to say meeting date. So when we first met our contact, we know when we met them. So if we were to run this and see if we can input data and see if it's written to a file, we can just check that out. Ooh, I better bring it over here for us on the other screen. So you can see that here. So we'll just write in, okay, my first name, righto, Dr. D, mobile number, well, it really doesn't matter. This is just text, of course, so it literally doesn't even require an @ symbol for an email. But we can just type in whatever we want. I'm not doing it with null fields. I'm just checking that it will work. We'll see if it saves. It says it's written to a file. So if we go and hunt in our system for that location, oh, here we go, local folders, contacts has been written. See if it wrote the right data to the file. We can check the format here. And interestingly, there we have all of the data in order. So we've written that to a file. Now, if we close that file down, we'll have another go and see what happens when I just change the data slightly. I'll change the numbers slightly as well. And our meeting, whenever we met, we can go back in time if we like. And just pick a random date. All right, we'll save that. It says it's written to the file. Let's have another look at the file and see if it appended it. And we can see here it did append it accurately, although it does still write the time which it accesses from our system, even though the entry field is short. You need a custom control to enter both time and date, and you define them by using our internal object referencing, which you can do in code. But here we're just writing a date into a string into a file and appending to the file, and you can see it all works. So that's very good. We could then go into our second form and start accessing that data from the file. I'll enter a little bit more information. We'll come back to that in a moment. And I'll show you how to access the data from the second form. I'll lay out the second form and I'll be back with you in a minute. Okay, so bear with me as I go through what's happened here. I've laid out my second form. You can see that here. If I press the load all data button, all data should load up. I can enter more data and go back to form 1, which you would remember looks like this, where we're entering data. Now I've entered more data into our file as well. So well, I won't show you that until I load it. But if we go into Form 2 and into the code, if we look at that, I have to lay out some variables that I'm going to take the data from the file and place them into arrays. I'm taking each separate comma-separated variable and placing it into a different list, because on each line of our file we'll have, say, a name, a first name, and the first position will be position 0, then position 1, 2, 3. So I need to set up some arrays to hold that information. So that's what I've done here right at the start of Form 2. I've given some global declarations here. I've simply used similar variable names. I've got strings here, string arrays, in fact, where I'm storing up that information. And I've given those arrays a length, which is traditional. You can change the length of those arrays. It doesn't matter a lot here because we're just outputting them into our text boxes. The arrays are just to give you a kind of a location to store the data and a kind of length of array to use, to play with. You could make it 50 and it wouldn't matter that much. So here we've also got lines. We're getting the lines from our file. I've got a big string here object, which I'm putting all of the file information in, which I'm going to output into our first form part. They're all file data. We'll contain the big string in a minute. My list will build a list of data from each line of the file. So I have to break that list up. And you can see here I've also got button 3, which goes back to form 1. So that one is the enter more data or quit button. I haven't yet started on the search, so we'll come back to that, entering a search string, and the results from the search will be there, but we need to search for a contact. And I should be able to break up my variables into just 2 out of the list of 6. So I'll have a name and a mobile number that will appear here. Let's go back and have a look what's happening inside button 2 when I load all the data, if you see there. So load all data. All of this stuff's happening in here, button 2. So we have a string called all, which I just use as a kind of internal storage. I've got a counter which I use that I assign a value to of 0. I'm using a try again to process the file, so I'm opening up our local folders contacts file, if you remember, a text file. I call it txt so that I can simply open it up in Notepad to have a look at it and edit if I want. I use this file read peek command here, which basically allows me to open the file, and it says while I look into the file and there's something there, it's greater than naught, then keep going and keep checking the file. So that's why this is in a try here. So we try and open the file, then we try and read it. Basically, that's what we're doing. When we do read what's in the file, we read a line here, we put it into our lines object, and we keep building our big string, and we put a new line character at the end of every line, which is this environment new line. And then we also can split our lines up into a list of information on each line of the file. We increment our counter because we're going through a while loop and looping through things. And we start setting things into these arrays called first name, surname, address, and so on. And we put all of the data into there, which we get from our file. Now, we then can go down here and we can put all of the big string into the text box there. Now you'll notice that these global variables I am not accessing yet. I'm going to access them in a minute when I try to pick 2 of them out and put the phone number and the name into the next text box. So we finish the catch exception. If we get an error, we do the error here to a string and just return and break out of there. But if everything's going well, we should be able to write the big string into text box 1, which should put all the information from the file into our first text box. Then what we're doing is we're running a for loop. We're going through the first name array, and we're processing the data in that array, and we're looking for the name, and we're looking for the phone number. So we're looking for the name and the phone number with the same numbers that we found there. So we process through them, and we're writing that all string, which I'm building here by adding the name and the phone number and a new line to it for each name and the according phone number. So let's see how we work here. and see if all of that information is actually going into the two text boxes we found. So here we have form 1. We can start by adding in some more information. So we can say Queen Elizabeth, not at Buckingham. Oh, maybe not too much of a royalist, but anyway, mobile number. We'll give her a mobile number and address, and then we'll save that to the file. We'll see if that works. Looks like it's written to a file. So now we're going to view our contacts. So let's have a look at that. We go into our second form, which is here, and we need to load all of our data. And we can see there that we've done that. That's pretty good. And it keeps going. And there's Queen Elizabeth down the bottom there. And we have here a name and mobile. Didn't seem to find our Queen Elizabeth. I'm not sure. Seems to be an error there with our lack of having an environment new line there. I can check that out. But basically, we do have most of it working with all of the file data being written there with new lines. We've got names and mobile numbers there. So let's go in and we'll get our search. We'll search for a contact there. I can have a look at my file and show you. So if I open this file up, it's probably an error with Queen Elizabeth. I'm not quite sure. Yeah, Wyatt had PM. Did I write that into the form? I'm not sure. That looks like it's part of that time. So I'll go and fix that, and we'll come back into it, and we'll get our search working. So we can have a look at a bit of the code. I went through here before. I just cleaned it up a little bit for you. It makes more sense. So we've got first name, my list naught, because it's the first variable in the list of comma separated variables. The surname's the second one, the address is the third one, the phone number's the fourth one, and so on. So they're given appropriate numbers starting at naught. I put the count down the bottom so that it doesn't confuse our counting through our arrays and placing the data in the right place. We're showing that data in a big string in text box 1. We're also showing names and phone numbers and a new line in the second text box. And then I've got a search button. So if I go into our design of our form 2, we have this search button. If I click there, we should get into button 1. So it's not actually text box 3, it's text box 4. And we should be traversing through the names, the length of the name array, and then we should be putting the name, if it starts with our search string, or the second name starts with the search string, then it should say we've found the name. And then it should put the name in there. Now I've got a message box here which will pop up saying we found the name, just for testing, and then we close that there. So let's test that. Let's see if that works. So here's our program running. You can see the code there, just so you might like to grab that screenshot to have a look at it. So if I go into viewing the contacts and bring that form over here now, and we've got the first name and second, we can load all of our data. We had that error in the file. I fixed that. Queen Elizabeth still is there now. Phone numbers there. We can enter into our... Now, I know that Fred Flintstone was in there. Found Fred Flintstone, go okay, Fred Flintstone, and then we get a phone number for Fred. So if we look for doctor, found Dr. Kratos, and then it shows Dr. Kratos there. We could look. We've got Homer Simpson here. We could do a search for Homer. Now it is showing our results without clearing it. You can clear that. You could put a line between whoever it is you find. It's up to you with that environment new line. You can go back to Form 1 and enter in more data here by pressing that button, and then you can go and you could enter more data. You can view contacts again, load them up again. I think that's working as well as we're going to get it working right here, right now. It's been a long video, so half an hour's enough, isn't it? Our time's up. But we don't have to actually load the data here. We should just be able to search for something. So if we go and look up Queen, let's see if it finds Queen Elizabeth. Apparently not. Oh, maybe we do have to load the data. Found Queen Elizabeth. Oh, well, of course, we need to load the data from the file before we can search for it. So there you go. And there's Queen Elizabeth. It's all working. There's the code for that button. If you want to go back up here again, there's the big string code where we're loading the data into those forms. There's how we're loading the arrays. Going back up here, we have our internal variables. We have our button 3 returning to form 1. We have our internal objects here, our string array my list, our big string, our line string, and our global arrays. If we want to save more names, we can change that number. So I'm glad to have worked with you again. Let's move on, and I'll be back with another program before you know it. Thanks for watching Computing with Dr. D.